Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the edge of the massive council chamber, her hands folded behind her back as she watched the other delegates take their positions. The room stretched upward for what seemed like miles, its curved walls lined with viewing platforms designed for dozens of different alien species. Some needed water tanks. Others required gas-filled chambers. A few existed only as energy patterns that danced through specially designed containment fields. Elena had been humanity's representative to the Galactic Council for 5 years now. 5 long years of careful words, precise bows, and diplomatic smiles that sometimes made her face hurt by the end of each session. She had memorized the greeting protocols for 47 different species. She knew exactly how long to wait before speaking to the temporal shifters, who experienced time at a different rate. She understood which topics would offend the hive speakers and which compliments would please the crystal singers all. Of this knowledge had been crammed into her head during 3 years of intensive training on Earth. The instructors had been clear about the rules. Humanity was still new to galactic society. They were on probation. One wrong move, one diplomatic mistake, and Earth could find itself cut off from the wider galaxy forever. The other species had made their feelings about humans very clear during the admission process. Humans were violent. Humans were unpredictable. Humans had a history of solving problems through warfare rather than discussion. If Earth wanted to join the galactic community, humanity would need to prove they could be civilized. Elena adjusted her formal robes and walked toward her assigned platform. The human delegation area was small compared to the others, tucked away in a corner where it wouldn't draw much attention. The message was clear. Humanity was here on sufferance, not as equals. The crystal singers began the session with their traditional harmonic greeting. Elena waited for the notes to fade before she bowed at precisely the correct angle. Too shallow would be disrespectful. Too deep would suggest submission. The margin for error was paper thin. Today's main discussion centered on trade routes through the Kepler sector. Elena had studied the briefing materials for weeks, but she already knew how this would go. The major powers would divide the routes among themselves. Humanity would get whatever scraps remained, if anything. The Zephyrian delegate spoke first, their crystalline body chiming as they communicated. The translation came through Elena's earpiece a moment later. The Kepler routes represent a vital economic corridor. Proper management requires species with proven stability and mature judgment. Elena kept her expression neutral, though internally she winced. Proven stability was code for not humanity. The Zephyrians had been part of the galactic community for over 1,000 years. They saw humans as children playing at being adults. The Nebulite representative spoke next, their gaseous form shifting colors as they communicated through chemical releases. The Nebulite collective agrees. These routes are too important to risk with untested species. More of the same. Elena had heard variations of this argument countless times. Humans were too young, too violent, too unpredictable to be trusted with anything important. They could have the routes nobody else wanted, the dangerous ones that passed through asteroid fields or pirate-controlled space. The hive speaker delegate rose from their platform, wings buzzing softly. The collective has analyzed human behavior patterns. Your species shows concerning tendencies toward individual decision-making and emotional responses. These traits make you unsuitable for managing critical infrastructure. Elena felt her jaw tighten but forced herself to relax. She had heard worse. The hive speakers were a collective consciousness that made all decisions as a group. They found human individuality deeply disturbing. One by one, the major species spoke. All of them agreed that humanity should be excluded from the main trade routes. A few offered token alternatives, minor routes that barely qualified as space lanes, or partnership roles where humans would do the grunt work while others made the real decisions. When Elena's turn finally came, she stood and delivered the response she had prepared. The Human Federation appreciates the Council's careful consideration of this matter. We understand the concerns about our species' relative youth in galactic terms. We are willing to accept a smaller role as we continue to prove our reliability and maturity. The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but she delivered them with a diplomatic smile. This was the game humanity had to play. Accept the insults, swallow the pride. Pretend that being treated like dangerous children was perfectly reasonable. The session continued for several more hours. Elena listened as the other species carved up trade routes, mining rights, and colonization permits. Humanity got scraps, a few minor routes through dangerous space, rights to mine asteroids that nobody else wanted, permission to establish colonies on worlds that were barely habitable. Each decision was presented as generous consideration for humanity's special circumstances. The subtext was always the same. Humans were barely civilized savages who should be grateful for whatever they were given. Elena maintained her diplomatic mask throughout the entire session. She nodded at the appropriate moments. She expressed gratitude for the Council's wisdom and fairness. She promised that humanity would work hard to prove themselves worthy of greater trust in the future. The only sign of her true feelings was the way her hands clenched behind her back, nails digging into her palms hard enough to draw blood. When the session finally ended, Elena returned to her quarters on the station. The rooms were smaller than those assigned to other delegates, but she had stopped complaining about such things years ago. Complaining would be seen as evidence of human aggression and unreasonableness. She poured herself a glass of Earth whiskey from her personal supply and sat at her desk to compose her report to Earth. The words came automatically after 5 years of practice. The Council had once again demonstrated their commitment to gradual integration of newer species. Humanity's patience and diplomatic approach were slowly earning respect. Progress was being made even if it seemed slow. All lies, of course. Or at best wishful thinking. The truth was that humanity's position hadn't improved at all since joining the Council. If anything, it had gotten worse as the other species became more comfortable, treating humans as second-class citizens. Elena finished her report and sealed it for transmission to Earth. Then she opened her personal files and began updating her real observations, the files the Earth government would never see, where she recorded her honest assessments of each species' military capabilities, economic vulnerabilities, and political weaknesses. It was information that served no purpose in their current situation. Elena told herself she was just being thorough, maintaining complete intelligence files as any good diplomat should. But sometimes, late at night after particularly humiliating sessions, she found herself studying those files with something that wasn't quite diplomatic curiosity. She closed the files and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring another session, another round of polite insults and diplomatic humiliation. Elena would smile and bow and express gratitude for treatment that would have started wars if directed at any other species, because that was the price of being part of galactic civilization. Humanity had to prove they were civilized, no matter how uncivilized the treatment they received in return. Elena fell asleep wondering how much longer this could continue, how many more insults humanity would swallow in the name of diplomacy, how much more they could endure before something finally broke. She didn't yet know that the breaking point was closer than she thought. 3 months had passed since the Kepler sector trade route decision, and Elena Vasquez barely recognized herself in the mirror anymore. Dark circles shadowed her eyes from sleepless nights spent reading casualty reports. Her diplomatic uniform hung loose on her frame, weight lost from meals skipped while dealing with one crisis after another. The trade route blockade had been even worse than Elena's most pessimistic projections. The Zephyrians and their allies hadn't just excluded humanity from the profitable routes. They had actively blocked human ships from using any passages through the sector, claiming security concerns and traffic management protocols. 3 human colonies in the Kepler region found themselves completely cut off. No supplies, no medical shipments, no communication beyond emergency channels that the Council monitored. Elena had watched the population numbers decline week by week as people died from treatable diseases and equipment failures. The first colony to go dark was New Geneva, population 43,000. They had sent increasingly desperate messages as their water recycling systems failed. Elena had brought their situation before the Council 17 times. Each time she was told that humanitarian aid would be considered after proper security assessments were completed. The security assessments never seemed to finish. New Brisbane went dark 2 weeks later. Their fusion reactor had developed problems that required specialized parts. Parts that were readily available but couldn't be shipped through the blockade. Elena had begged the Nebulite Collective to allow just one supply ship through. They had refused, claiming that reactor technology posed potential weapons risks. 51,000 people had been living on New Brisbane. Elena stood at her usual position in the council chamber, hands folded to hide their trembling. Today was another emergency session she had called to address the humanitarian crisis, the 23rd such session in 3 months. The Hive Speaker Prime rose to address the assembly, wings clicking in what Elena had learned was their equivalent of clearing their throat. The human delegate continues to request special considerations for her species' colonization errors. The collective finds these repeated appeals disruptive to council business. Elena bit back her first response, and her second, and her third. Finally, she managed something that sounded diplomatic. Honored delegates, we are not requesting special consideration. We are asking for basic humanitarian aid. Children are dying while we debate procedures. The Crystal Singer delegate chimed a response. The galactic community cannot be held responsible for humanity's poor colony planning. These settlements were established in economically unstable regions without adequate preparation. Poor colony planning. Elena almost laughed at the absurdity. The colonies had been thriving before the blockade. New Geneva had been exporting rare minerals. New Brisbane had been a major agricultural hub. They had been successful enough that other species wanted to muscle in on their trade routes. The temporal shifter delegate spoke next, their words coming slowly due to their different relationship with time. Time stream analysis suggests human colonies were established in locations that would inevitably become untenable. This outcome was predictable. Elena's hands clenched tighter. The only thing that had been predictable was that the major species would find excuses to squeeze humanity out of anything profitable. The collective proposes a long-term solution, the Hive Speaker continued. Human colonies in contested regions should be voluntarily relocated to more suitable worlds. The Council has identified several planets that would better serve human needs. Elena had seen the list of suitable worlds: barren rocks with barely breathable atmospheres, prison planets in all but name, far from any trade routes or strategic resources. The euphemism voluntary relocation didn't hide what this really was. These worlds offer excellent opportunities for human development, the Nebulite representative added, their gaseous form shifting to calmer colors as if discussing a vacation destination, rather than forced deportation. Isolated environments would allow humanity to mature as a species without the pressures of galactic commerce. Isolated. Cut off. Forgotten. Elena understood the subtext perfectly. The Zephyrian delegate chimed their agreement. Such arrangements would benefit all parties. Humanity would have worlds to develop according to their unique needs, while more established species could maintain stability in critical sectors. Elena looked around, the vast chamber at delegates who were discussing the forced relocation of hundreds of thousands of humans with the casual indifference of planning a dinner menu. These were species that claimed to represent the pinnacle of galactic civilization. Beings who spoke of harmony and cooperation and universal values. But when it came to humanity, those values evaporated like morning mist. The human delegate will now respond, the council moderator announced. Elena stood slowly. For 5 years she had bitten her tongue and swallowed her pride. She had smiled while being insulted and expressed gratitude for treatment that no other species would tolerate. She had played by their rules and followed their protocols and pretended that being treated like dangerous children was perfectly reasonable. For 3 months, she had watched her people die while these civilized beings debated whether human lives were worth the inconvenience of allowing a single supply ship through their precious blockade. 68,000 people had lived on the 2 colonies that had gone dark. 68,000 men, women, and children who had committed no crime except being human. Elena felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart. Something deeper. Something that had been holding her together through 5 years of diplomatic humiliation. Honored delegates, she began, and for the first time in years, her voice carried an edge that made several species shift uncomfortably in their assigned areas. For 5 years, humanity has played by your rules. We have been polite. She paused, letting the word hang in the air. We have been diplomatic. Another pause. We have been civilized. The last word came out with a tone that Elena had never used in the council chamber before. A tone that suggested civilization might not be humanity's natural state. We have accepted trade restrictions that no other species would tolerate. We have endured insults that would have started wars if directed at your peoples. We have watched our colonies be strangled by blockades while you debate whether our children's lives are worth the paperwork of a humanitarian shipment. Elena's voice grew stronger with each sentence. The diplomatic mask she had worn for 5 years was cracking, and something much more primal was emerging from beneath. You speak of voluntary relocation to suitable worlds. You mean exile to prison planets where you will never have to think about us again. You speak of our poor planning and inevitable failures. You mean that you have decided we are not worthy of the spaces we have claimed. The chamber had grown unnaturally quiet. Elena realized that some species were actually backing away from her platform, though she had not moved from her position. But there is something you have forgotten in all your careful planning and superior wisdom, Elena continued, her voice now carrying a quality that made the translation system struggle to find equivalent concepts in alien languages. Humanity did not ask to join your galactic community because we needed your protection. We asked because we hoped we could be partners instead of problems. We hoped civilization was possible. Elena looked around the chamber at beings who had spent months casually discussing the deaths of her people. That hope has now ended. The silence in the council chamber stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Elena could see the confusion in the alien delegates' reactions. The crystal singer's harmonic frequencies had shifted to discordant notes. The nebulite's gaseous forms were cycling through colors that Elena's briefings had told her indicated uncertainty and alarm. They had never heard a human speak this way. Before Elena stepped forward from her platform, breaking protocol for the first time in 5 years, several security drones immediately activated. Their sensors locked onto her, but she ignored them completely. You want to know about humanity? Elena asked, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber without amplification. You want to understand what we really are? Then let me tell you a story. The hive speaker Prime's wings buzzed frantically. The human delegate is out of order. Return to your assigned position and follow proper procedures. Elena smiled, and something in that expression made the hive speaker actually take a step backward. Proper procedures, Elena repeated. Yes, we have been following your proper procedures for 5 years now. But you see, that is not how humanity normally operates. What you have been dealing with is not humanity in its natural state. What you have been dealing with is humanity on its very best behavior. She began to walk slowly around the center of the chamber, and the security drones tracked her movement like predators watching prey. Except Elena moved like she was the predator, and they were simply obstacles she had not yet decided to notice. You believe humans are violent and unpredictable, Elena continued. You are absolutely correct. But you have made a critical error in your assessment. You assume that violence and unpredictability make us weak, make us unsuitable for civilized society. Elena stopped walking and looked up at the Zephyrian delegate's platform. Tell me, honored Crystal Singer, what happened to the Shatar Empire? The crystalline being's form flickered with surprise. The Shatar disappeared over 2,000 years ago. Historical records suggest they encountered a hostile species during expansion operations. They encountered humanity, Elena said simply. The Shatar found Earth during our medieval period. They decided we would make excellent slaves. Strong backs, simple minds, easily controlled. They began abducting humans for their labor camps. Elena's smile grew wider, and now even the security drones seemed to hesitate in their tracking. The Shatar had technology we could barely comprehend, faster than light travel, energy weapons, force fields. They had conquered dozens of worlds. Their empire spanned half a galaxy. They saw humanity as primitive savages with pointed sticks and metal swords. The chamber was dead silent now. Even the temporal shifters had synchronized their time perception to follow Elena's words in real time. Would you like to know what happened to the Shatar Empire? Elena asked, turning to address the entire assembly. Would you like to know why there are no Shatar delegates sitting in this chamber today? Without waiting for an answer, she continued. Humans learned. We always learn. When the Shatar took our people, we studied their ships. When they destroyed our cities, we analyzed their weapons. When they killed our leaders, we adapted our tactics. It took us 300 years, but we learned. Elena began walking again, her pace measured and deliberate. We learned how to hide from their sensors. We learned how to board their ships. We learned how to turn their technology against them. And then we learned where their homeworlds were. The Crystal Singer delegate chimed a discordant note. This is ancient history with no relevance to current council business. Oh, but it is relevant, Elena replied. Because it establishes a pattern. You see, the Shatar were not the only species to make this mistake. There were the Corvani raiders, who thought human merchant vessels would be easy targets. There were the Gethak slavers who believed our colony worlds were defenseless. There were the Zenthari expansionists, who decided our solar system would make a nice addition to their territory. Elena's voice had taken on a conversational tone, as if she was discussing the weather rather than describing genocide. "Would you like to know what all these species have in common?" she asked. "Besides the fact that they all underestimated humanity?" She paused for effect. "They are all extinct." The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Elena could see the alien delegates processing this information, cross-referencing their historical databases, and coming to some very uncomfortable conclusions. "But those were different times," the Nebulite representative said, their gaseous form now cycling through colors that indicated extreme agitation. "Humanity has evolved. You have joined galactic civilization. You follow our laws and protocols." Elena laughed, and the sound sent ripples of unease through the assembled delegates. "We follow your laws because we chose to follow your laws. We accepted your protocols because we hoped they might work. We have been civilized because we wanted to be civilized. But civilization, you see, is not humanity's natural state. Civilization is a choice we make, and choices can be unmade." Elena stopped in the exact center of the chamber and looked up at the assembled aliens. "For 5 years, humanity has operated in what we call courteous mode. We have suppressed our instincts, controlled our responses, and presented ourselves as the peaceful, diplomatic species you required us to be. We have pretended that being treated as second-class citizens was acceptable. We have smiled while you insulted us and thanked you for scraps from your table." Her expression shifted, and suddenly every delegate in the chamber could see something that had been hidden beneath the diplomatic facade for 5 years. "But you have made a critical error. You have mistaken our courtesy for weakness. You have confused our patience with submission. You have assumed that because we chose to be civilized, we had forgotten how to be anything else." Elena's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow it carried clearly to every corner of the vast chamber. "The courteous mode has just been deactivated. Alarm." Klaxons began sounding throughout the station as something triggered the security systems. Elena had not moved, had not touched anything, had not even raised her voice. But somehow every alien delegate in the chamber suddenly understood that something fundamental had just changed. "You want to relocate our colonies?" Elena asked, her voice still conversational. "You want to exile us to prison worlds? You want to treat us like dangerous animals that need to be caged?" She smiled one more time, and this smile contained millennia of human evolution, generations of survival instincts and the accumulated fury of a species that had spent 5 years pretending to be something they were not. "Very well. If you insist on treating us like dangerous animals, then perhaps it is time you learned exactly how dangerous we can be." The security drones finally moved to intercept her, but Elena was already walking calmly back toward her platform as if nothing had happened. The drone's targeting systems kept losing lock on her, unable to classify her as either threat or non-threat. "This session is adjourned," Elena announced, using a level of authority that no human delegate had ever claimed before. "I suggest you all contact your home governments immediately. You are going to need new instructions." As Elena left the chamber, every alien delegate sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that they had been negotiating with someone who had been holding back far more than they ever imagined. The age of human courtesy was over. The age of human honesty was about to begin. Elena's words reached Earth exactly 14 hours and 37 minutes later, transmitted through quantum communication arrays that the Galactic Council had not known humanity possessed. The message was simple, only 7 words long, but it changed everything. Diplomatic restrictions lifted. Recommend immediate defensive posturing. The response was swift and devastating in its scope. Admiral Chen Zhang had been waiting for this message for 5 years. As commander of Earth's merchant fleet, he had spent those years watching Elena's diplomatic reports with growing frustration. Every insult, every casual dismissal, every death that could have been prevented if the aliens had shown even basic decency toward humanity. Now, finally, the politicians had gotten out of the way. "Signal all vessels," Chen ordered from the bridge of what the Galactic Registry listed as the cargo hauler Peaceful. Traitor, the ship's computers, immediately began transmitting coded bursts to every human vessel within 1,000 light years. Within minutes, Chen watched his tactical display transform. Cargo ships that had been scattered across dozens of systems suddenly began moving with military precision. Mining vessels abandoned their operations and formed into attack formations. Transport ships started broadcasting military transponder codes that should not have existed. The Galactic Council had been very specific about humanity's military restrictions. No battleships, no heavy weapons platforms, no military alliances with other species. Human vessels were limited to basic defensive systems and small-scale mining and exploration equipment. Humanity had followed those restrictions to the letter. They had simply been very creative in their interpretation. The peaceful trader was indeed a cargo hauler. It could carry over 50,000 tons of supplies across interstellar distances. The fact that it could also carry 50,000 tons of high-explosive warheads at relativistic speeds was just a happy coincidence. The mining vessels were indeed equipped with industrial cutting tools. Plasma torches designed to slice through asteroids worked equally well on alien hull armor. Rock crushers built to pulverize ore could do interesting things to enemy vessels that got too close. The transport ships did indeed carry passengers and supplies. They also carried something the Council had not thought to ask about: humans. Lots of humans. All of them trained in various forms of military operations that were technically classified as emergency response procedures. Admiral Chen smiled as reports flowed in from across human space. The Kepler blockade that had seemed so insurmountable was about to discover what happened when humanity stopped playing by other people's rules. Captain? Sarah Morrison commanded the Independent Prospector, one of 40 mining vessels that had been working the asteroid fields near the Kepler jump points for the past 2 years. The Zephyrian patrol ships had grown accustomed to seeing human miners in the area. They were just part of the background, like space debris or cosmic radiation. The aliens had made a critical error. They had assumed that because the humans were not obviously military, they were not dangerous. All vessels, this is Morrison, Sarah broadcast on the mining frequency. Operation Clean Sweep is now active. Repeat, Clean Sweep is active. Around her, 39 other mining vessels suddenly revealed their true nature. External cargo pods jettisoned to reveal military-grade sensor arrays. Industrial equipment reconfigured into weapon systems. Engines that had been running at minimum power suddenly blazed to full military thrust. The Zephyrian patrol fleet found themselves surrounded by vessels that had appeared to be harmless miners just moments before. Ships that should have been defenseless were now targeting them with weapons that violated half a dozen galactic treaties. Unknown vessels, you are in violation of galactic military codes, the lead Zephyrian ship transmitted. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Sarah almost laughed. Even now, faced with the obvious fact that they had been completely deceived, the aliens were still trying to use their legal procedures. Negative crystal singers, Sarah replied, using humanity's somewhat disrespectful nickname for the Zephyrians. This is Admiral Morrison of the Human Mining Corps. You have 1 minute to clear the jump points or we will clear them for you. Admiral? The Zephyrian commander transmitted, confusion evident even through the translation systems. Human mining vessels do not have military ranks. You are correct, Sarah acknowledged. Human mining vessels do not have military ranks. Fortunately for us, we are not mining vessels. We are warships disguised as mining vessels. There is a difference. The distinction was lost on the Zephyrians, but it became clear 30 seconds later when Sarah's fleet opened fire. The aliens discovered that humanity had been studying galactic military doctrine very carefully during their 5 years of diplomatic exile. Every weakness, every blind spot, every tactical assumption had been cataloged and analyzed. Zephyrian shields were designed to deflect energy weapons and kinetic projectiles. They were not designed to handle industrial plasma cutters that operated on completely different frequencies. Crystal Singer hull armor could withstand direct hits from military-grade missiles. It could not withstand the focused pressure waves generated by mining equipment designed to crack open asteroids. The engagement lasted exactly 4 minutes and 23 seconds. When it was over, the Kepler blockade that had strangled 3 human colonies for months had simply ceased to exist. Similar scenes played out across dozens of systems as humanity revealed the scope of their preparations. The Council had known about human colonies in contested regions. They had not known about the hundreds of hidden supply depots, The concealed shipyards, the camouflaged defense platforms that had been built under the cover of legitimate infrastructure projects. The Nebulite Collective discovered that their gas mining operations in the Vega system were sharing space with human atmospheric processors that turned out to be military installations. The Hive speakers found that human agricultural research stations were actually intelligence-gathering posts that had been monitoring their communications for years. Every human concession, every diplomatic compromise, every seemingly innocent request for cultural exchange programs had been part of a vast intelligence operation. Humanity had been studying their alien neighbors not for friendship, but for war. The most shocking revelation came when human fleets began emerging from jump points that were not supposed to exist. The Council's navigation chart showed vast regions of empty space that suddenly disgorged ships by the hundreds. Humanity had not just been building a hidden military. They had been building a hidden infrastructure to support that military. Secret bases, concealed supply lines, camouflaged shipyards, all of it constructed during 5 years of apparent diplomatic compliance. The Galactic Council called an emergency session within hours of the first engagements. The delegates who had so casually discussed humanity's forced relocation just days before now faced a very different situation. Elena Vasquez was not in the council chamber to hear their emergency declarations. She was aboard the Diplomatic Courier, a ship that the council's records listed as a small transport vessel designed for carrying messages between Earth and the galactic capital. The records were accurate as far as they went. The ship could indeed carry messages. It could also carry a full Marine battalion and enough firepower to level a small city. Elena had spent 5 years traveling between Earth and the Council station in what amounted to a disguised dreadnought. "Ma'am," her aide reported, "the Council is demanding an immediate ceasefire and your return to the chamber." Elena looked out at the stars and thought about 68,000 dead colonists. About 3 months of watching her people die while aliens debated whether human lives mattered. About 5 years of diplomatic humiliation that had accomplished nothing except demonstrating that courtesy was interpreted as weakness. "Tell the Council," Elena said quietly, "that humanity will be happy to discuss terms once they demonstrate that they understand what terms actually mean." The age of human diplomacy was over. The age of human victory had begun. The war that followed lasted exactly 18 days, 14 hours, and 42 minutes. Historians would later debate whether it could even be called a war, since one side had spent 5 years preparing while the other side had spent 5 years assuming their opponents were harmless. Elena stood once again in the Galactic Council chamber, but everything had changed. Gone were the elaborate alien protocols and careful seating arrangements designed to emphasize humanity's inferior status. Human ships now patrolled the space around the station. Human Marines stood at strategic positions throughout the complex. Human technicians had quietly taken control of the station's vital systems. The alien delegates sat in their assigned areas, but their posture was very different from the casual arrogance they had displayed weeks before. They had learned some uncomfortable truths about their primitive human neighbors. The Crystal Singers had discovered that their harmonic communication systems could be disrupted by specific frequency generators that humans had disguised as musical instruments in their cultural exchange programs. Disrupted Zephyrians could not coordinate their collective decision-making, turning their greatest strength into a critical vulnerability. The Nebulite Collective had found that their gaseous forms could be scattered and dispersed by electromagnetic fields that humans had been testing in their atmospheric research projects. Scattered nebulites lost their unified consciousness and became helpless individuals floating in space. The Hive speakers had learned that their collective minds could be isolated by jamming the quantum entanglement networks they used for communication. Individual drones cut off from the collective were essentially mindless automatons, unable to function without constant guidance. Every species in the Galactic Council had discovered that humanity had been studying them far more thoroughly than they had ever imagined. Cultural exchange programs had been intelligence operations. Trade negotiations had been reconnaissance missions. Diplomatic visits had been military surveys for 5 years. While the aliens had been dismissing humanity as irrelevant primitives, humans had been cataloging every weakness, every vulnerability, every possible way to defeat species with technology thousands of years more advanced than their own. The Human Federation has prepared terms for a new galactic compact, Elena announced to the assembled delegates. She no longer stood at the small platform assigned to junior members. She now spoke from the center of the chamber, the position traditionally reserved for the Council's most senior representatives. These terms are non-negotiable, Elena continued, her voice carrying an authority that no human had ever claimed in this chamber before. Any species that wishes to remain part of the galactic community will agree to these conditions. Any species that refuses will find their membership terminated. The Hive Speaker Prime's wings buzzed frantically. Humans cannot dictate terms to the Galactic Council. You are a single species among dozens. You lack the authority to restructure galactic civilization. Elena smiled, and the expression contained 5 years of suppressed frustration and 3 months of watching her people die needlessly. You are correct, she acknowledged. We are a single species. But we are the single species that just demonstrated the ability to defeat any combination of your forces. Authority, as it turns out, comes from the ability to enforce your decisions. We have that ability. You do not. Elena gestured, and holographic displays materialized throughout the chamber. Star charts showing the current positions of human fleets, tactical analyses of every major alien military installation, complete intelligence profiles on the leadership of every species present. Let me be very clear about our current situation, Elena said, walking slowly around the center of the chamber as she had weeks before. But now her movement was that of a predator who had revealed her fangs, not prey hoping to avoid notice. Every major trade route in the galaxy is currently under human control. Every significant military installation has been neutralized or captured. Every communication network is being monitored by human intelligence services. You are not negotiating from a position of strength. You are surrendering from a position of complete defeat. The Crystal Singer delegate chimed a discordant note of protest. This is not how civilized species resolve disputes. There are proper procedures, legal frameworks, diplomatic protocols. Yes, Elena agreed. The same diplomatic protocols you used to slowly murder 68,000 humans while debating whether their lives were worth the inconvenience of allowing medical supplies through your blockade. The same legal frameworks you used to justify forcing our people onto prison worlds? Because we were not sufficiently grateful for your contempt. Elena's voice hardened. You had 5 years to demonstrate that your civilized procedures could produce civilized results. They could not. So now we will try something different. The terms Elena presented were simple and comprehensive. All galactic trade routes would be managed jointly, with no species permitted to exclude others without clear justification. Humanitarian aid could not be restricted for political reasons. Colonial rights would be respected regardless of a species' age or political status. Most importantly, disputes would be resolved through negotiation between equals, not through the casual dismissal of species deemed insufficiently advanced. These terms ensure that no species can be marginalized the way humanity was marginalized, Elena explained. They guarantee that the strong cannot simply ignore the weak because they find them inconvenient. The Nebulite representative shifted through colors, indicating extreme agitation. You are restructuring the entire foundation of galactic civilization based on a single diplomatic incident. 68,000 deaths is not a diplomatic incident, Elena replied coldly. It is a war crime. The only reason we are offering terms instead of pursuing war crimes tribunals is that we prefer justice to revenge. Elena paused and looked around the chamber at delegates who were finally beginning to understand that everything had changed permanently. But make no mistake, she continued. If any species attempts to return to the old system of casual cruelty disguised as diplomatic procedure, humanity will remind them why that system no longer exists. The formal signing of the new Galactic Compact took place 3 days later. Every major species agreed to the terms, though some required additional demonstrations of human resolve before they fully accepted the new reality. Elena stood in her new office aboard the station, reviewing reports from across human space. The colonies that had been cut off were receiving supplies again. Medical shipments moved freely through formerly restricted routes. Human merchants traded as equals with species that had treated them as servants just weeks before. Her aide entered with the daily intelligence briefing. Ma'am, the temporal shifters are requesting a private meeting to discuss long-term stability arrangements. The Outer Rim Coalition wants to establish formal trade partnerships. and the Zephyrian Assembly is asking about cultural exchange programs. Real cultural exchange programs this time. Elena had made it clear that humanity's intelligence operations would continue, but they would now operate within the framework of mutual respect, rather than one-sided exploitation. Elena nodded and signed off on the day's reports. Outside her window, ships from dozens of species moved through space lanes that were no longer controlled by artificial restrictions. The galaxy looked the same as it had months before, but everything was different. Humanity had never wanted to be the galaxy's apex predator. They had hoped to be partners, allies, friends. But when forced to choose between extinction and dominance, humans had made the same choice they had always made throughout their history. They had refused to go quietly. The other species were learning to respect that choice, and for the first time since joining the galactic community, Elena believed that real cooperation might actually be possible. Not because everyone was civilized, but because everyone now understood the consequences of choosing to be uncivilized. Elena smiled as she watched ships from a dozen different species working together to escort a medical convoy to the outer colonies. It was not the galaxy humanity had hoped for when they first reached for the stars, but it was a galaxy where human children would never again die because other species considered their lives expendable, and that, Elena decided, was worth everything it had cost to achieve.